So in this video, I'm going to look at the GridPane. The GridPane is somewhat similar to the TilePane, but it is different though. It is a bit more flexible. So as I told in the first layout theory kind of thing, in the GridPane, we can have different sizes of these tiles here. So you can kind of resize the tile. So it's kind of, if you look at the dotted lines here, you can see it's kind of like a tile pane, but where you can customize the height and width of each of the tiles, but they are still kind of set into this kind of grid so that it won't look messy or anything like that. So let's try to change the layout into a grid pane instead. So let's first open up the FXML file in Scene Builder to see what the difference is. So right now we have TilePane, and we have these special ones called preferred tile width and height and columns. So let's go and see what the GridPane looks like. So let's just put the GridPane. I'll just put it inside of the TilePane for now. So it's quite different. So we can see that the GridPane, immediately we can see that it's kind of like a table. And the interesting thing is that we can, for example, do like this, so that now this is smaller and this is bigger and this is even bigger in height. We can't resize because of the constraints we have on the tile pane right now, but it's more just to show how we can do this. Let's try to get rid of the tile pane. I'll just delete that, and then we'll use the grid pane instead. Probably best to go for the controller. Remember to set the controller class here. In the other videos I did it by coding, but you can just do like this. And now we have a grid pane. So it's a bit more complicated. So first off, if we look at the layout, we don't have the same layout properties. We only have this H gap and V gap. That is the gap between the different cells. So if I take something like, can be pretty nice, let's go for 20 and 20, we can see we get the gaps like that. So if you know about the HTML table, it's very much like that, if not in the entire same thing. Let's just give the grid pane a name, so I'll just call it grid pane, like that, and save. Okay, I'll just overwrite it, no problem. And save that. So now I have a name for that, and I can look into the layout. So the grid pane, by default, it has something inside of it. It actually has something here called column constraints, and it has something called row constraints. So for example, here I can set different constraints like minimum width and height. And what I did before when I dragged this is actually changing the row constraints. So if I look at this row, we can see the minimum and preferred and maximum height has been changed because I moved this around like this. So this way we can kind of set, let's say if we wanted to have some layout with a top here with some information or maybe a menu or whatever, then we can set the height of this exact row to be something special. And what you'll often find is that when you have a layout like this, it can be beneficial that, for example, two of these two are actually joined together, these two rows, but these two columns, but only for this row. So let's try to look into that, how we're going to do that. It's a bit more complicated than the other layouts, so that's why I actually seldomly use it. I would probably use something else like HBoxes, VBoxes, and maybe the GridPane, because I find that in most cases they are better suited for and simpler to use. But let's try to see. So right now, this shouldn't really work because we kind of changed the, let's see, yeah. So we changed sample here so that there's a grid pane instead. So let's go back to the controller and change this into a grid pane like this. Which, and Alt import class. So now we have a grid pane. And then we need to use the grid pane so we can add the different VBoxes. Let's see what that looks like. So we add the same as in the last video, the drink and the description. And the interesting thing that we can see here is that, I don't know if you can see that the text is kind of somewhat more bold than it was before. So it's probably because we have 10 of these drink description on top of each other, and the 10 images is also on top of each other. So when we put something into the grid pane, we need to be a bit more careful how to put it in there. And this is also one of the reasons why I'm not that fond of using it. But let me show you. So first off, we don't use the normal get children. If we look at the grid pane, it actually has like an add directly. So we want to do that instead. So when we add to the grid pane, we actually need to say not only what we add, but also where to add it. So we can see that we need the node, and then we have like 2 or 4 different numbers that we need to kind of fill out. So let's try to put some numbers in here. So if I put like 0.0 in here and then run that, we should get kind of the same result as before. Because now they are still on top of each other. If we put the first one here, if I put I here, we should get something where we probably get an error because we get outside of it. Let's see, okay. So it actually fills it in without an error. But what we can see here is that we fill in, this is the column and this is the row. So we're just filling into the first row and only using one of the columns. So if we want to change that, I could say something like, let's say something like, I'll say column equals I divided by 5, because that's half of 10, so it should go from 0 to 1. Let's say column here. Okay, so I kind of broke it. I'm not sure why let's see here. Of course, this also needs to kind of reset. So I probably need to change this, the way I'm going to do this, put it into like, I should have like 5 here and then do another for loop here. I like to call that K because I and J are so similar. Just move that in here, say go for maximum, so from 0 to 2, and then that's random. Let's see, so let's calculate the row is equal to I multiplied by K. Let's see, that goes from, that would be problematic, no, 0. So that would be 0, 1, okay. So we go from 1 to 2, and then That should be fine. And then the column is just actually just k -1 in this case. Let's try to look at that. So it looks a bit better. Yeah, okay. Yeah. This is kind of, yeah. So the idea is that you can actually put the different images and everything into this view here. So let's try something else, because now I have a loop for doing this. I want actually to show something else than using the loop. So let's remove these like that. Probably need to remove that as well. Kind of put it here. Yes. So I need to define the row and column. I'll set that to 0 and 0. And it should put it in the first, just one element in the first corner. Okay, I put one too many of these still. So now I have one element here. If I want to add another element, I can do like this, and I can say one here. Oh, that's because you cannot add the same VBox twice. So let me just refactor that pretty easily. So public VBox, and then I'm going to say create VBox or create sales item. Let's call it that. And I'm just going to take the code here, which is actually randomized somewhat up here. And then I'll just say return VBox. And then I can say create sales item, and it will create a random sales item like that. So I'll get two different ones. We cannot have the same element twice in the, so that's it. So now we see we have two of them. And for some reason it is the same image. It's just because I kind of that's the random stuff here. Maybe if I change this, it will be different. Nope, still the same. Okay. So let's try to put something. So we can also add here to row number 1 here. Then we will add to the next column like this. And we can also see that it also scales pretty nicely. You could set some constraints so we cannot collapse like that, but that would be pretty cool. I kind of destroyed my my randomness, I think, because let's see if I move it up as an instance variable, if I'm right about that. Yeah. So the reason that this actually doesn't work is because that the create sales items are actually run, these are called so fast that it creates a new randomizer each time. So that's why I'll just put the randomizer up here, so we'll get real random images from the next next int like that. Okay, so now we have like 3 drinks, and you can imagine that this way we can create a lot of items, and we can scale them, and we can do as we want. One of the things I wanted to show also is that we can tie together different columns and rows. So this is one way to add something, but let's say that I want something that is kind of that's a bit longer or something. So let's say I'm going to create a button, and this button will have like a very long text, something like this. And I want to add that, so I'm going to say GridPane add. And instead of creating the sales item, I'm going to add the button, and I'm going to add it to the first column and the third row. Let's see what that looks like. And we can see that the button can't fit because there's some dots here. And that is suggesting that the button is really too big. It's cut off here because it's too big to be inside of the constraints of this. We can see if I make it smaller, it's cut off like this. So what would be, if I wanted the button to continue into this column over here, this is one of the powers of using the GridPane instead of the TilePane, I can actually say that this needs to span 2 columns. So if I want to do something like that, I just need to add more values. So I need to say how many actual columns is it spanning and how many rows. So I can say I want it to span 2 columns and 1 row. And let's try to go for that. So I probably mix them around, so it should be like this. It's hard when they're just I1, I2. And let's see. Did I forget something here? So it actually works in the sense that you can see that the button here is no longer cut off. If I make this smaller, you'll see that this is inside of a column here. And if I do like this, it actually spans both columns. It's more easy to see if I change the size. So you can say b dot, and then you can say set minimum width. And then I can set this to just the largest number that a double can be. And then it will try to set the minimum width to extremely large number. And that will effectively make it okay. Just a second. Set min width, just a second. So min width is not but preferred width, because that was the, so this way it will fill out the entire row and column. If I add more drinks, like if I go, let's say, copy these 3. So now I have 1. This is the second row, third row, 0, and then 1, 0, 1, 1, and then 1, 0, and 2, and 1, 0, like that. So this way, let's see that. So now we have 3 columns and we have 4 rows. So what we can see now is that this spans 2 rows and not 3, because it fills out until this row over here. If we wanted to span further into this, we can just say we want it to span 3 rows, reload it, and now it spans the entire bottom here. No, it didn't really. The reason for that being that I put 3 here instead of 2, so there's actually 4 rows, so I needed to change that into 4. So let's try it again now that I fixed that. So there's kind of like an empty row before, so now it spans everything. And for example, we could also do something like right now, the for example, this string here spans only here, or we could say that this one would span multiple rows or columns, whatever. And we can just specify that by using these values here. I didn't put the values here, but these are defaulted to 1. They'll span 1 row and 1 column. So that's basically it, how to use the grid pane. And yeah, so I think if you want to use the grid pane, use it for something where you need that tile kind of appearance, or you need that to be set up in a specific way like this with some resizing properties. But also be aware that it's a bit more complicated to add the elements like this. Of course, if you use fixed elements, like if you do all of this directly from Scene Builder, it's a bit easier to set things up because you can set them up like manually from in there. But when you have to do it in code, it can be quite a task to do that. So that's it for the, let's go back here. That's it for the grid pane. And next up is the border pane, which is quite different from all the others.